My name is Petra Sundvik. I am 41 years old. I am a geologist with the Utah Geological Survey, specializing in structural geology of the Uinta Basin. I have a master's degree from the University of Utah and 16 years of fieldwork experience in some of the most remote terrain in the American West. I am a precise person by training and by temperament. I measure things. I record things. I date things. I do not make claims I cannot support. I am about to make a claim I cannot fully support, and I want to explain why I am making it anyway. On September 14th, 2017, at approximately 2:15 in the afternoon, in a remote section of the high Uintas Wilderness, at approximately 10,800 feet elevation, a being that stood between 8 and 9 feet tall, covered in dark hair, with a face I can only describe as both profoundly non-human and profoundly familiar, sat down across from me on a flat granite shelf, looked directly at me and said, "You're not going to believe this, but I need you to listen." I believed it. I listened, and I recorded it because recording things is what I do, and my field recorder was running in my breast pocket before I had made any conscious decision to run it. Because when you are a field scientist, the recorder is always running. Here's why this changed everything for me. Before I have told you anything, the recording still exists. I have listened to it more times than I can count. The voice on it is deep, resonant, carrying the specific acoustic signature of a very large thoracic cavity, something with a significantly larger chest than a human being produces. The English on it is not accented. It is not hesitant. It is the English of someone who has been thinking in it for a long time, who knows its rhythms and its idioms and its specific emotional registers, and at 1 hour, 12 minutes and 43 seconds into the recording, there is a silence. And then a sound that I hear every time I play it as the most frightening sound I have ever recorded in 16 years of field work. We will get there. The Uinta Mountains are the only major east-west trending mountain range in the lower 48 states, a geological anomaly produced by a Precambrian basement uplift that resisted the dominant north-south compression of the basin and range. They rise to just over 13,000 feet at Kings Peak, and their high country, above 10,000 feet above the tree line in the exposed granite and quartzite of the ridge systems, is some of the most genuinely remote terrain in Utah. The high Uintas Wilderness designation covers about 460,000 acres and includes sections that see fewer than 100 visitors per year. I had been working in the Uintas for 4 field seasons when the encounter occurred. My specific research area was a structural mapping project in the eastern sections of the range, documenting fault systems in the Precambrian basement rock that had implications for oil and gas migration in the basin below. It was not glamorous geology. It was detailed, solitary, physically demanding work that required me to cover terrain that was not on trail in conditions that changed quickly at that elevation, with equipment that had to be packed in on my back. September 14th, 2017 was the 3rd day of a 4-day solo mapping survey. The weather had been cooperative, clear, cold at night, warming to the mid-50s by midday at altitude. I had covered my planned transects for the morning and had stopped for lunch on a granite shelf at approximately 10,800 feet with a view northwest toward the main ridge that I had been using as my primary orientation landmark. I was alone. I had been alone for 3 days. My satellite communicator showed a green status light, indicating I was within emergency contact range. My field recorder was running. Standard practice during my analysis time in case I wanted to record verbal notes about the morning's observations. I was eating a protein bar and writing in my field notebook when the shadow fell across the page. I looked up. What most people don't understand about the first second of an encounter with something outside your framework of reality is that the brain does something extraordinary. It tries very hard to fit the new input into an existing category. It runs through its files at speed. It offers candidates, bear standing upright, considered and rejected in the same second because the proportions were wrong and the quality of the uprightness was wrong. Human being considered and immediately rejected because the scale was wrong by a factor that made mistake impossible. Rock formation not considered because it was moving. The being that was standing at the edge of my granite shelf, perhaps 8 meters away, was moving with the specific, deliberate slowness of something that understood that its approach required management. Not threatening management, cautious management. It was approaching the way you approach a bird you want to observe at close range, without sudden movements, without direct eye contact held too long, with the whole body communication of non-threat. It was approximately 8.5 feet tall, dark hair, thick and long, covering most of the body except the face and the palms. The face was broad, the brow pronounced, the eyes set deep and dark. The build was massive through the shoulders in the way I had read about, and that reading had not prepared me for the scale of the upper body in proportion to the height created an impression of concentrated physical power that was not threatening in its display, but was simply, factually, present. It stopped approximately 5 meters from me. We looked at each other for a very long time. My experience revealed something profound in those first 30 seconds. I was not afraid in the way I had imagined I would be afraid if I ever found myself in this situation. I was something more interesting than afraid. I was suspended. The cognitive capacity that produces fear had been temporarily allocated to the processing of the input, and the processing of the input was consuming every resource I had. The being looked at me with the focused, systematic attention of something that was also processing. That was also allocating its resources to the task of understanding what it was looking at. And in that mutual suspension, two beings wildly different, both in the process of revising their understanding of the world. Something happened that I have spent 7 years trying to understand. It made a decision, and the decision was to speak. You're not going to believe this, but I need you to listen. The voice was deep, not the subterranean rumble of popular imagination, an actual voice with pitch and timbre and the specific acoustic shaping of a being whose vocal tract had been producing English long enough to have developed the muscle memory for its sounds. It was resonant in the way of a very large chest cavity with an undertone that I felt as much as heard, but the words were perfectly, unambiguously formed. I did not respond immediately. I was not capable of responding immediately. I sat on the granite shelf with a protein bar in one hand and a field notebook in the other, and I looked at an 8.5-foot being that had just spoken English to me, and I waited for my cognitive systems to come back online. They took approximately 8 seconds. "I'm not going to hurt you," it said, while I was still processing the first sentence. "I know how this looks. I know what you're thinking. Just stay where you are and listen. Okay, I said. It was the only word I had. It settled, not sitting in the human sense, but a careful lowering of its mass onto the granite opposite me, reducing its height relative to me in a gesture I recognized as deliberate and that I would later understand as part of a sophisticated social intelligence. It knew that reducing its physical dominance in the encounter would make the encounter more manageable for me. It knew that height communicated threat and that reducing the height would reduce the threat communication. It understood social geometry. My observations consistently showed that, from the first moment of settled proximity, the being was actively managing the encounter with a social intelligence that was not instinctive, but applied, chosen strategies, deployed toward a specific goal. It had thought about this. It had, I came to understand over the following hour, been thinking about it for a long time. How long have you? I started. Long enough, it said. I'll explain, but first I need to know if you can hear me without running. I looked at the 8.5 feet of it and thought about running on a granite shelf at 10,800 feet with nowhere to run to. Yes, I said. Something in its posture changed. A settling, a release of something it had been holding. Not relief exactly. Something more like the resolution of a long-maintained effort. Good, it said. Then we can talk. The first thing it explained was language because it understood that language was the thing I was most unable to process, and that processing it was the precondition for receiving anything else. You want to know how, it said. Not a question. A statement that revealed it had anticipated this and had prepared for it. Yes, I said. We learn, it said. And the simplicity of it was, I realized later, itself the answer. Not we were taught or we developed it or any more complex formulation. We learn. The same way any being with sufficient intelligence and sufficient exposure learns the primary communication system of the beings it lives alongside. How long? I asked. It considered this, not performing consideration, actually computing an answer that required thought. Different individuals, different timelines. Some never get further than comprehension. Some get to rudimentary production. A few of us, a pause, get further. Further than what I'm hearing right now? No, this is as far as I've gotten. Something in its tone that I can only describe as dry, wry. The register of someone making a joke that requires the listener to understand irony. It's enough for this conversation. My experience revealed something profound in that exchange about the nature of language acquisition. It was describing a population-level variation in English competency, not a single individual who had learned English through some unique circumstance, but a community in which English learning was a known and variable phenomenon. Some comprehended. Some could produce basic communication. A few, it was telling me, had reached functional fluency. How many of you speak English this well? I asked. Another genuine pause. Longer. I don't think I should tell you that, it said finally. Some information is specific in ways that create risk. Numbers are specific. It was protecting its community, even in the act of the most unprecedented disclosure any member of its species had ever made to a human being. It was carefully, strategically protecting the information that could be used to find them. That was the moment I understood I was not talking to an animal. Why are you talking to me? I asked. It was the question underneath everything, the question I needed answered before I could fully receive anything else. It looked at me for a long moment. The eyes, in that extended look, had a quality I have thought about for 7 years, and that I will try to describe one more time, knowing that description is inadequate. They were doing something, running a process. Not the process of deciding whether to answer, I thought. That decision had been made before the approach. The process of deciding how to answer honestly without saying more than was safe to say. Because you're a scientist, it said, and because I've been watching you for 3 days and you're careful. You're the kind of person who measures twice. The idea that it had been observing me for 3 days, had tracked my movements, assessed my behavior, conducted its own 3-day evaluation of my character before approaching, restructured my understanding of the encounter completely. This was not an accidental meeting. It was a selected one. And because, it continued, things are changing in ways that require someone to know, someone who won't. It stopped, started again. Someone who will handle it correctly. Handle what correctly? The fact of us, it said, the fact that we exist, and what is being done to the places we exist in. What most people don't understand about that statement is the weight it carried in the context of where I was sitting. I was a geologist working in a wilderness area that was at the boundary of my research zone, adjacent to active oil and gas exploration. I had spent 4 field seasons documenting the structural geology of a basin that the energy industry had significant commercial interest in. I understood from my professional work what resource extraction looked like in practice and what its effects were on the terrain above the resource. It was telling me that the being I was looking at, and whatever community it belonged to, was watching the same thing I was measuring, and that the measuring mattered. "Tell me," I said, and it did. For approximately 1 hour, it talked. I am not going to reproduce the full content of that hour here for reasons I will explain. What I will give you is the structure, the shape of what was communicated, and why. It began with territory, the specific drainages and ridge systems of the high Uintas that its community used. Not precisely, not with the kind of locational specificity that would constitute a map, but in terms of what those areas provided and what was changing about their ability to provide it. It described in language that was sometimes scientific and register and sometimes not, the effects of the seismic survey work that had been proceeding along the range's southern boundary over the previous 3 years. The vibrations, the equipment, the roads that were cut to support the survey work and that remained after the survey was finished, providing access that had not existed before. "The roads are the problem," it said at one point, "not the survey. The roads stay. And where the roads stay, other things come." It talked about water, the specific springs and streams that its community relied on in the high country, and the changes in those water sources over the decade it had been observing them. Some had reduced in flow. Some had changed in chemistry. It described the changes in terms that suggested chemical sensing, taste, smell, the specific qualities of water that its tongue and nose could assess with a precision I could not match. It talked about community, not in detail. The specific protective withholding I had noticed around numbers was present throughout, but in structure. The high country was not one community, but several, and the communities had territories and relationships and a communication system that connected them across distances that were large by human standards and apparently manageable by theirs. My observations consistently showed that throughout the hour, it navigated carefully around the specific information that would constitute a finding. The locational, numerical, and organizational details that, in the wrong hands, would be actionable against its community. It was sharing the shape of the situation without sharing the contents. It was a sophisticated information management strategy, and it was being executed by a being who had clearly thought about what information was safe to share and what was not. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked about 40 minutes in. "What do you want me to do with it?" "I want you to..." It stopped. "I want someone on your side to understand that when the decisions are made, there is something at stake that isn't in the map. There are people in this wilderness, not your kind, but people. Here's why this changed everything for me as the central request. It was not asking me to become an activist or to blow a whistle or to produce the recording. It was asking me to carry knowledge, to be someone in the room where decisions were made who knew what was actually in the wilderness that those decisions affected. It was asking for a witness." I said, "I understand." And then I said, "I'm sorry. I have to tell you, I've been recording this." 1 hour, 12 minutes, 43 seconds into the recording, I said those words. There is a silence on the recording after them that lasts 11 seconds. I know the duration exactly because I have measured it. 11 seconds of complete silence in which the ambient audio, the wind across the granite, the distant sound of a bird, continues with perfect clarity. The silence is the absence of the being's voice, not the absence of the environment. 11 seconds. Then the sound that I have described to myself in 7 years of private processing as the most frightening thing I have ever recorded. It was not a roar. It was not a threat vocalization in any sense I can map onto known animal behavior. It was a sound that was, in its register, not so different from the voice that had been speaking English to me for the previous hour. But the quality of it was completely different. The shape of a word without the word itself. The emotional register of human speech stripped of its content and left as pure feeling. The feeling was, I have made a terrible mistake. Not anger at me, I thought in the moment, not yet. The sound was a reckoning with itself. The specific, universal vocalization of a being who has realized that a decision it made has had consequences it did not intend and cannot undo. I understood immediately what had happened. It had disclosed to me. It had assessed me across 3 days and had made a determination about my character and my discretion, and had made the unprecedented decision to approach and speak. And it had not known about the recorder. It had known about my notebook, my GPS unit, my satellite communicator. It had been watching me for 3 days and understood my equipment. But the field recorder in my breast pocket, running as background documentation practice, had not been visible from any observation angle. It had spoken to me in full trust, and the full trust had been broken by technology it hadn't accounted for. I had not intended the betrayal. The betrayal had happened anyway. It stood. The rising of that mass from the seated position had a quality I will not forget. Controlled, despite everything. The precise, deliberate movement of something managing itself in a moment of acute distress. Not the explosive, uncontrolled movement of an animal acting on pure adrenaline, the movement of a being that was afraid and angry, and was making choices about how to express those states. It looked at me, The look was different from every look that had preceded it. The assessment look of the approach, the careful, managing look of the conversation, the open, engaged look of the speaking, all of those were gone. What replaced them was something I can only describe accurately as grief, not rage, not yet, or perhaps not at all, though I was not certain in the moment. Grief, the specific, comprehensive, recognizable look of something that has lost something it cannot recover. That is, it said, then stopped. Then, that was, it did not finish either sentence. The grammar of what it was trying to say was beyond what the moment would allow. "I'm sorry," I said. "I didn't decide to record. It runs automatically. I didn't think—" "No," it said, not an accusation, a correction, delivered with a precision that cut through my apology. "You didn't think. That is correct." I had no defense for that. It looked at the breast pocket of my jacket where the recorder was. Then it looked at my face. Then it looked at the recorder again. And the look was not the look of something deciding whether to take it. It was the look of something calculating what the existence of the recording meant and what the available responses to that meaning were. My observations consistently showed that even in the acuity of that moment, it was thinking, not reacting, thinking, assessing options, evaluating consequences, applying the same systematic intelligence to the problem of the recording that it had applied to the decision to approach me, to the management of the conversation, to the careful navigation of what to share and what to protect. "You have to delete it," it said. "I won't use it to harm you," I said. "I won't give it to anyone who—" "That is not what I asked." The voice had changed, not threatening. I want to be precise about this because the precision matters for understanding what followed. It was not threatening in tone. It was the voice of someone who has run the options and has arrived at a conclusion about what is necessary and is stating that conclusion with the full authority of someone who has nothing left to manage except the truth. "Delete it," it said again. "Please." The please undid me. Here's why this changed everything for me in that moment. That word, that single word, added to a demand that could have been issued without it, that in the context of the physical disparity between us, needed none of the softening it provided, told me everything I had spent 7 years processing. It told me that what was across from me on that granite shelf was not a being that operated from power. It was a being that had chosen, even now, in the moment of its worst fear, to ask rather than take, to negotiate rather than force. It had something that, in the moment, I was in danger of failing to match: dignity. I looked at the recorder in my hand. I had taken it out when I disclosed the recording. The instinct of a scientist presenting evidence. I looked at it for a long time. "I can't delete it," I said finally. The 11 seconds of silence that had preceded its sound was nothing compared to the silence that followed this. "But I can promise you what I'll do with it," I said. "I can promise you what I won't do. And then you can decide if the promise is worth anything." It looked at me for a very long time. Then, talk. I told it everything I was willing to commit to, in the specific language of commitment, rather than the vague language of intention. Scientists make commitments to data, to its preservation, its integrity, its responsible use. I treated the recording the way I would treat a sensitive research finding, as something that required ethical handling, the specific contours of which could be negotiated. "I will not give the recording to any media outlet," I said. "I will not post it online. I will not share it with anyone who might use it to locate your community or harm your people." "People," it said, quietly. The word seemed to register. "I will keep it as evidence," I said, "of a conversation that happened. Not as entertainment, not as proof of something sensational, as the record of a meeting between two people who had a conversation that mattered." "And if you die," it said, "what happens to the record?" I had not thought about this. I thought about it now, sitting on a granite shelf at 10,800 feet across from something that was asking me to think seriously about the disposition of evidence after my death, which was a more sophisticated question than any human being had asked me about my field records. "I'll make arrangements," I said. "Someone who will honor what I've told you. Someone I trust completely." "You have someone like that?" "Yes." Another long silence. It was looking not at me, but at the middle distance, the processing look, the look of a being running calculations that required the full allocation of its cognitive resources. "What do you want in exchange?" it said finally. My experience revealed something profound in that question. It was offering me a trade. Not because it was forced to. It could have taken the recorder. It could have intimidated me into compliance. It could have used any of several forms of leverage that were available to something of its physical capacity. It offered a trade because trade was the ethical mode it operated in. It was extending the same dignity it had shown in the pleas. "Nothing," I said, "except for you to know that not all of us are what you've had reason to fear." It looked at me then, directly, long, with the fullness of attention I had felt throughout the conversation, but that had, in the crisis of the recording, been redirected to other things. The attention came back to me fully, and I sat in it, and I did not look away. "I know," it said. "That's why I talked to you." It left within the next 10 minutes, not in fear and not in anger. I want to be precise about this because the manner of the departure was itself information. It stood. It looked at me one final time with the look I have since thought of as the closing look, the deliberate final accounting of the encounter, filed for whatever archive it maintained. And then it turned and walked back to the tree line and was gone with a silence that I had ceased to find surprising and had begun to find clarifying. Silence, for a being of that mass, was a choice, and the choice to be silent was a form of control that was exercised as casually and completely as breathing. I sat on the granite shelf for approximately 2 hours after it left. I did not write in my field notebook during those 2 hours. I have never not written in my field notebook during downtime in the field in 16 years of field work. The practice did not survive that afternoon. The notebook was in my lap, and I could not make the hand move to write anything down, because writing things down is for things you can process, and I could not yet process what had happened. What I could do, and what I did, was listen. I played the recording back from the beginning. I listened to the approach, the silence of the approach, the wind, my own breathing, and then the first words, "You're not going to believe this, but I need you to listen." I listened to the hour. I listened to the words, and to the voice under the words, and to the specific places where it chose what to say and what not to say. I listened to the 11-second silence after my disclosure, and to the sound that followed, and to the negotiation, and to the departure. At the end of the recording, there is a section of approximately 40 minutes in which there is nothing but wind and my breathing, and at the 30-minute mark, the sound of me beginning to weep. Not dramatically, the specific, quiet weeping of someone who has been altered at a fundamental level and whose body is processing the alteration through the most available channel. I have kept that part of the recording too. My observations consistently showed that in the days and weeks following the encounter, my relationship to my work changed in ways that I am still tracing. The structural mapping report I submitted for the Eastern Uinta survey that autumn was the most complete and the most explicitly context-rich document I had produced in my career. Not only the geological findings, but the full environmental and ecological context of the research area. The data existed to support that context. I had simply not been in the habit of including it because it was not strictly required. After September 14, 2017, it was required for me, if not for the report. The recording is 17 minutes longer than the conversation because after it left, I sat on the granite and the recorder continued to run until I remembered to stop it. 73 minutes total. I have listened to it, by my best estimate, over 200 times. What most people don't understand about having evidence of something that changes everything is that the evidence does not resolve the situation. It complicates it. Every time I play the recording, I am in the presence of a responsibility I did not ask for and cannot discharge simply. There is no version of using this recording that is clean. There is no disclosure that produces only good outcomes and no bad ones. The being I spoke with understood this. Its careful navigation of what to share and what to protect was the understanding of someone who had thought about the problem of disclosure for a long time and had arrived at conclusions I was only beginning to reach. It had managed its own disclosure carefully. I had to manage mine. The arrangement I made is not one I am going to describe in detail because the detail could be used to access the recording by people who would not use it responsibly. I will tell you that it exists, that it is preserved, and that the conditions under which it would be released are specific and designed to protect the community it concerns. I will tell you that the person I trust with it knows what it contains and has agreed to the conditions. I will tell you one more thing about the recording that I have not shared publicly before. At 47 minutes and 22 seconds, in the middle of the section about water chemistry, there is a moment where the speaking pauses. And in the pause, from a direction that is off mic, from further away, from the tree line, from somewhere I could not have seen, there is a sound, brief, low, in the same acoustic register as the voice speaking to me, but different, a second voice. It was not alone. There was a witness. I do not know what the second voice said. I do not know what role the witness played in the decision to approach me or in the decision to leave. I know that the encounter was not entirely the unilateral act of a single individual, but was observed by at least one other member of its community, and that community chose in the end to let it happen. They had decided together that the risk was worth it. There was a moment in the conversation, approximately 50 minutes in, when I asked the question I had been holding since the beginning. Why have you stayed hidden for all this time? Why not make contact before? It was quiet for a long time, longer than any other pause in the conversation. Because of what happens when we don't stay hidden, it said finally. Tell me. You already know, it said. You're a scientist. You know what happens to things that are found. I did know. I knew the history of what happens when a population is discovered that was not previously known to exist. The institutional response, the research apparatus, the legal questions, the commercial interest, the media, the public pressure, the slow, inevitable erosion of the conditions that allowed the population to survive. I knew it from the geological record, from the fossil record, from the living record of every endangered species I had ever encountered in my fieldwork. Discovery for a population without institutional protection is not rescue. It is often the beginning of a different kind of threat. We have been discovered before, it said, not at the scale that would, but individuals have been encountered, have been. Another careful stop, protecting the specifics, taken, studied, in situations they did not choose and could not leave. My experience revealed something profound in that admission. The secrecy was not paranoia. It was historical. It was the rational response of a community that had direct experience across generations with what human institutional interest produced. The careful management of visibility, the maintenance of the population just below the threshold of official acknowledgement, was a survival strategy developed through painful experience and transmitted through whatever channels knowledge moved in that community. And now, I asked, why now? Why is this conversation happening? Because, it said, staying hidden has costs too, and the costs are increasing. And I made a decision, we made a decision, that one person knowing the full truth of what we are and what we need was worth the risk. What do you need? I asked. The same thing everyone needs, it said. The place we live to still be there, the water to be clean, the quiet to continue. I want to tell you what I believe as precisely and as honestly as I can, based on 17 minutes of recorded conversation and 7 years of living with its implications. This creature holds a secret that is not the secret popular culture has been obsessing over. The secret is not where they live, or how many there are, or whether they are real. Those questions have answers, and the answers are, they live in the remote wilderness of the American West, and possibly beyond. There are enough of them to constitute a functioning community, and they are real in the most concrete sense of the word, because I have a recording of one of them speaking English to me for 73 minutes on a granite shelf in the high Uintas at 10,800 feet. The real secret is what they are. They are people. Not in the legal sense. There is no legal framework that currently accommodates them, and the creation of one would produce exactly the institutional attention they have spent centuries avoiding. But in the sense that matters more than the legal sense, they are beings with language and community and history and strategy and grief, and the capacity to negotiate and the social intelligence to know when to add please to a demand that doesn't require it. They are beings who have watched us for a long time and have, through observation, developed an accurate picture of what we are. Our capacity for destruction, our institutional tendencies, our individual variability, the specific possibility that some of us can be trusted. They have developed, through painful historical experience, a policy toward us that is cautious and evidence-based, and that allows for exceptions when the evidence supports them. I was one of the exceptions, not because I am exceptional, because I had been for 3 days visible to something that was watching me carefully, and what it had seen was apparently sufficient. What most people don't understand about what that implies is its full weight, that the wilderness is not empty, that the remote terrain of the American West, which we have been mapping and extracting and recreating since the first European contact, has been occupied throughout by something we chose not to acknowledge, and that the something has been watching our entire project of occupation and extraction with the patient, careful attention of beings who understood long before we articulated it that what we were doing had consequences that extended beyond ourselves. They knew about the externalities before we had a word for them. Here's why this is what I need you to understand above everything else. The conversation on the granite shelf was not a cryptid encounter. It was a first contact, not the first contact. They have been in contact with individual humans before, I now believe, in forms that did not leave recordings. But it was a first contact of a particular kind, an explicit, chosen, strategic disclosure by a member of a non-human community to a member of the human community for a specific purpose. The purpose was to put knowledge in a place where it could matter. I am trying to put it where it can matter. I have spent 7 years deciding what to do with what I know. The recording, the conversation, the implications. All of it has been present in my daily life for 7 years, and the question of what my obligation is has not been simple and has not remained static and has no clean answer. I will tell you what I have concluded with the caveat that conclusions in situations like this are provisional. I concluded that I owe it honesty about what I'm doing, that the promise I made on the granite shelf was not a promise of eternal silence, but a promise of responsible handling. And that responsible handling includes, eventually, telling the story, not releasing the recording, not providing locational information, not doing anything that creates institutional risk for the community that made the decision to trust me with its disclosure, but telling the story, because the story is the part that belongs to both of us and belongs to you. I concluded that I owe it advocacy in the only way available to me, through my professional work, which continues to document the structural geology of areas adjacent to wilderness, that is, under resource extraction pressure, and which continues to be as complete and as contextually rich as I can make it. I cannot be a witness in rooms where I am not present. I can be a witness in the rooms where my research is received, and I can bring what I know to the work that I do in those rooms. I concluded that I owe it acknowledgement, the simple, personal, daily acknowledgement that the world is larger than my species, that intelligence does not begin and end with us, and that the wilderness I work in is occupied by beings whose claim on it predates ours, and whose ability to maintain that claim is, at present, dependent on remaining below the threshold of our institutional notice. That last acknowledgement is the one that keeps me up at night, not the fear of them. I have not been afraid of them since the afternoon I sat across from one on a granite shelf, and it added pleas to a demand it didn't need to soften. I am afraid of us, of our institutional reflexes, of the gap between the way we treat a thing we have decided is an animal and the way we treat a thing we have decided is a person, and the power we have to decide which category any given being occupies. They are in that gap. They have been in that gap for as long as we have been in their wilderness, and they have survived in it so far by being careful enough, smart enough, and lucky enough to stay below the threshold. I hope the threshold holds. I am not certain it will. I want to tell you what the last words on the recording are, because they are the words I return to most often, and because they are the words that, in 7 years of sitting with this, feel like the most important thing that was said. At 1 hour, 7 minutes, and 12 seconds, after the negotiation, after my promises, after it had heard what I was willing to commit to, and had sat with it long enough to make a determination, it said the following: "I want to ask you something." "Yes," I said. "When you tell people about this, if you tell people about this, what will you tell them to do? What is the thing you'll ask of them?" I thought about it. Sitting on granite at 10,800 feet with a 73-minute recording in my pocket and the most important conversation of my life still happening, I thought about what I would ask of people. "I'll tell them to be careful," I said. "I'll tell them that the wilderness isn't empty, that what they do there matters, that how they behave in places where they think they're not being watched, that they are being watched, and that the watching is being done by something that is keeping track." "That's good," it said. "That's close. What would you add?" It was quiet for a long time. Then, "Tell them that the world is not finished. Tell them that there are still things in it that they haven't found, and that the finding of those things does not automatically give them the right to decide what those things become. Tell them that discovery carries obligations, not just permissions. Discovery carries obligations, not just permissions," I repeated. "Yes," it said. "That's the thing I need someone to understand. That's the whole of it. I am 41 years old. I have 16 years of field work and one 73-minute recording, and 7 years of thinking about both. And I am at the point in the holding of this where the holding requires more than I can give it, and the sharing is what remains. Discovery carries obligations, not just permissions. That is what I'm asking you to carry, not the recording. I am not releasing the recording, and I will not, under the terms of the arrangement I have made, not the locational information. I do not have it in specific enough form to share, and I would not share it if I did. Not a demand for belief. I have been past needing belief for 7 years. I am asking you to carry the principle, the understanding that the wilderness you enter is occupied in ways that the official accounts of it do not include, that what you do there matters in ways you cannot fully anticipate, that your presence is noted, and your behavior is assessed, and your consistency over time is the evidence on which something beyond your sight is building its determination about what kind of person you are and what kind of person your species is. My observations consistently showed that in 7 years of returning to the Uintas, less frequently than before the encounter, and with a different quality of attention, the forest has had, on 3 occasions, the quality of inhabited presence that I first learned to recognize on a talus slope in a different wilderness, in a different context, before I had any framework for what I was sensing. 3 times in 7 years, the high country has felt watched in the specific, directed way that tells me I am known to something here, and that the knowing is mutual and ongoing. I have not tried to find the source of the watching. I have simply been, in those moments, as honest and as consistent and as present as I am capable of being. The assessment is not mine to manage. The evidence I leave in those moments is the only thing I can control. What most people don't understand about living with a secret this large is that the secret does not diminish with time. It deepens. Every year of professional work in terrain that is adjacent to the terrain it described, every structural geology report, every environmental assessment, every conversation in a meeting room about what the subsurface of the Uinta Basin may or may not contain carries the weight of what I know and cannot say. I am saying it now as plainly as I can to the widest audience I have access to, in the form that protects what I promised to protect while honoring what I believe the conversation was ultimately for. Tell them the world is not finished. Tell them that discovery carries obligations, not just permissions. Tell them to be careful in the wilderness, careful and consistent and honest, because the wilderness knows the difference. I am Petra Sundvik. I am a geologist. I record what I observe. I date the observations. I am willing to be wrong and willing to revise. On September 14th, 2017, at approximately 2:15 in the afternoon, something spoke to me on a granite shelf in the high Uintas and asked me to make sure that someone, somewhere, understood what it said. I have done my best. That is all any of us can do.